What's the exact moment you realized someone you were talking to was actually crazy? And how did you escape? He was a new student, and there was always something a little off about him. He'd constantly get headaches and need to leave class. He didn't mind telling everyone about his traumatic past, and every day he'd single out one person and try to get them to open up to him. My red flags really went off when he somehow found out I was going to be at a certain Eisteddfod in town and showed up to watch me. He even brought my favorite chocolate, something he'd written down from a text. This was less than a week after I met him, and we'd only had a 2-minute conversation in person. When I asked how he'd found me, he said, "I make an effort to find out everything about someone once I decide they're the sort of person I want to be like." He went on for what felt like forever about how I was the ideal girl, how I had the look, so many talents, that I was unique and out there while still being pedestrian. According to him, I was everything. I got out of it by saying I still had more songs to perform and a group piece to practice that he wouldn't see me for about 3 hours. Thankfully, he left. Let's just say after that moment, I never spoke to him again. A few months later, he left school after the teachers found his Tumblr. He'd been hiding his phone in the girls' bathrooms while they changed and posting the footage, along with other disgusting things. And on top of all that, he'd written a poem about the Eisteddfod girl, me, who he wanted to put up in his room on display. Dodged a frigging bullet there. Story 2. I went to a dentist recently. When I scheduled the appointment, I was actually kind of excited. He answered the phone himself and was able to get me in right away. When I showed up for my 2 o'clock appointment, though, the office was completely empty. No receptionist, no other patients, just silence. That probably should have been my first red flag, but I didn't leave. During the exam, he was polite enough, though I quickly realized it was just him. No hygienist, no assistant, no staff at all. As he worked, he started sharing his life story. I learned about the love of his life, a woman 30 years younger who got away. He told me his house didn't have electricity or running water, so he cooked and showered at the office. Then came the real twist. Apparently, the other 2 dentists nearby were sabotaging him, rerouting his phone lines so his calls went to their offices instead. He said he'd fixed the lines himself, which is how he'd gotten my call, and he couldn't report it to the city because, according to him, they were in on it too. I was almost relieved when he started talking about the woman he'd followed for years. At least, it distracted me from the fact that there were sharp instruments in my mouth. When the exam was over, I'd gone in because my wisdom teeth were killing me. He said I needed surgery to remove them and to fix 2 cavities. He wanted to do it right then. I told him I'd need to arrange a ride. That's when he said, completely seriously, "Oh, I don't give drugs. I'm not allowed to anymore." I noped right out of there. Went to a new dentist afterward. Turns out I didn't even have any cavities. Creepiest 2 hours of my life. Story 3. Back in college, I worked for a telemarketing firm as an assistant manager. My job was to walk up and down the rows of phone operators, making sure everyone was actually working. No texting, no snacking, no zoning out. One afternoon, I noticed an empty chair. I knew a blonde woman had been sitting there earlier, so I asked her cubicle mate where she'd gone. You had to be officially relieved to leave your phone, and I knew she hadn't asked. Her coworker just pointed toward a dark, roped-off section of the old building that was under renovation. "I don't know what's wrong with her," she said. She suddenly got mad, yanked her headphones off, and walked straight into that dark area. Just disappeared. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. A few of the operators started making jokes. "Oh, scary," or "Man, that's creepy. Better not go in there after her. Maybe she's got a knife and she's just waiting for someone to walk in." Oh! The section she disappeared into was pitch black, with a narrow makeshift path winding past mountains of old desks, filing cabinets, and chairs stacked high. Before that was a huge sheet of ghostly gray plastic, hanging from ceiling to floor to hide the construction mess from the rest of the office. I knew there were no lights back there. If I went in, I'd be out of sight of everyone, hidden behind that plastic curtain. And it wasn't impossible to imagine getting lost or even cornered among all that junk. I wasn't about to show fear in front of the team, though. So I rolled my eyes at their teasing and asked if anyone had a flashlight. One kid who walked home at night handed me his. I took a breath, lifted the edge of the plastic, and stepped inside. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dark and steadying the flashlight beam. That's when I heard it. A soft, muffled crying. coming from farther back among the jumble of upturned desks. I aimed the flashlight toward the sound. "Carol, is that you? Are you okay?" No answer. I moved deeper into the maze of twisted office furniture, stepping carefully through the debris. At one point, I had to duck under a fallen beam, then climb over another just to keep going. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I questioned my own sanity. If that wasn't Carol and someone was hiding back here, I'd be trapped. Getting out would be hell. I stopped and listened. Nothing. No crying. No creaking. Just silence. I swept the flashlight around, and as the beam began to dim, it caught on a stack of old window blinds piled in a corner. That's when I saw her. She was standing there, motionless, staring straight at me. Hands at her sides, face blank, completely still. She was wearing a long white dress, the same one she'd worn earlier that day. And in that dark, cluttered room, it made her look ghostly. I shone the light directly on her. "Carol, are you all right?" No response. I started walking toward her, talking more to keep my courage up than to actually start a conversation. Then, without warning, she ducked out of sight. It scared the hell out of me. "Carol, come on. You're supposed to be working and enough of this nonsense." And then, suddenly, she was there, right in front of me. She seemed to appear out of the darkness like an apparition, the dim flashlight catching only half her face. I forced myself not to scream. "Okay, now come on," I said, trying to sound steady. "Don't trip." She just stood there, staring at me. "Carol, come on," I repeated. In a deep, flat voice, she said, "I'm not Carol." I forced a smile, trying to sound casual. "Yes, you are. Now come on, let's go back to work." "I'm not Carol," she said again. "Carol is dead." Then she started laughing, high-pitched, childish giggles that echoed through the dark room. That's when I knew I was dealing with a full-blown lunatic at best, or something far worse. I have no idea how I managed not to scream or soil myself, but I said, "Oh, really? Okay then, I've got to get back to work." Then I turned around and bolted out of there. How I managed to get out of there so fast without tripping or breaking my neck is a miracle. I didn't stop running until I hit the plastic barrier. Then I took a second to pull myself together before stepping back out into the light. The crew was waiting, wide-eyed and silent. A few looked genuinely shocked to see me alive. They'd actually been debating whether to call the police, convinced she'd killed me back there. Turns out, since I rarely worked nights, I hadn't realized Carol already had a reputation, the loony, creepy one everyone avoided. I called the manager and told him what happened. He said he'd be right over. 15 minutes later, when he arrived, I handed him my badge and quit on the spot. Nope, not dealing with whack jobs, especially not at night. Story 4. My first job was at Target. I worked in the Food Avenue section, the place where you could buy popcorn, nachos, or soft pretzels. Most of those have been converted into Starbucks by now. There was a woman named Kay who came in quite often. She had a little cart with 2 wheels that she pulled behind her, filled with all sorts of things. She wore baggy dresses and had chopped the hair at the front of her head in jagged patches, almost to the scalp, like a ragged Benjamin Franklin. Kay would wander around for a while and then come to Food Avenue to buy a sandwich. Whenever we exchanged money, she would ask if she had swallowed or was choking on any change. I'd look at her calmly and say, "Nope, Kay, you're just fine," sometimes repeating myself 4 or 5 times. One day, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for being so kind and not treating me like I'm crazy. Everyone else does. When I was a little girl, I saw my grandmother pass away while eating. Can you imagine?" This was 15 years ago. I hope Kay has found peace and contentment wherever she is. Story 5. I went into a McDonald's the other day and a woman recognized me from some college classes we'd had together. At least I think that's what she said. She seemed pretty certain, and I guess she did look familiar. 2 eyes, a nose, some hair. I might have seen her before. She started telling me that her friend was psychic, could feel people's energy, and even read her mind. That wasn't the strangest thing I'd ever heard, and honestly, I could have rolled with that. But then she went on about a radio DJ from the next town over, who was supposedly watching her in her house through hidden cameras in her shower. She said she knew it was true because during his broadcasts, he'd play certain sound effects and make jokes about her every time she farted. I told her I had to get going. I was just there for carry out, and there were people waiting in the car. Story 6. I was at a family wedding when I noticed this guy I didn't know who was incredible on the dance floor. His moves were decent, but what really stood out was his commitment, the sheer charisma and joy he brought to it. You couldn't help but watch him. Later, my father-in-law struck up a conversation with him and eventually pulled me in too. The dancer had been telling my father-in-law in great detail about a recent manic episode during which he'd emptied his shared bank account, bought a boat, and sailed it from the United States to Denmark. He said he spent weeks there in a drunken haze before it finally dawned on him that he probably needed to tell his wife where he was, and also that they couldn't actually afford a boat. Partway through the conversation, it became clear that he was in another manic phase. Still, he was so engaging that we didn't try to pull away. Eventually, his wife came over and gently led him off the dance floor. We felt bad for her. Story 7. I work at the IT help desk at a small community college. People often stop by just to ask for directions, so when a guy came in asking where they train the police, it didn't seem unusual. We have a police academy on campus, so I started to tell him how to get there. Before I could finish, he began talking over me, saying he trained all the police here and used to be an instructor before they moved. I tried to give him directions again, but then he told me to look him up on my computer. Around that time, my coworker, a former Marine, overheard what was going on and came over to help. The man noticed his USMC shirt and asked if he was military. Then he launched into a story about being an Army-Navy Ranger who trained all of my coworkers' superiors. At that point, it was clear he was completely unhinged. I told him I was going to grab another coworker who knew the area better and slipped into the next office to hit the silent alarm for campus security. When security arrived, the man acted like he recognized the officer and asked what took him so long, claiming he'd come specifically to see him. The officer didn't know him. The guy was just out of it. All security could legally do was escort him off campus and hope he didn't return. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous walking to my car that evening. Story 8. I was standing outside of Greg's deciding what to have with my girlfriend a few steps away. A scruffy man walked straight up to her. Maybe he thought she was alone, grabbed her arm and said he was going to essay her. I'd already started moving when I saw him go over and she froze. I threw him off her and blurted the only thing I could think of, that I was going to hurt him first. Then he began screaming that I was going to do it to him and that he needed help, struggling to get away from me. My girlfriend grabbed me and pulled me back as his cries turned hysterical. She said something was clearly not right with him and pleaded with me not to hurt him. I stood between them until several security guards arrived, and as we calmly explained what had happened, he kept screaming that I had attacked him. In the end, I just walked off and bought 2 steak bakes from Greg's. The whole thing was very confusing. I don't think I handled it perfectly, but what are you meant to do when an insane man threatens your girlfriend and then forgets he did? She was fine, so all's well that ends well, I guess. Story 9. I have a coworker who's a real chatterbox. It always starts innocently enough. What she had for dinner, how her husband is doing after his car wreck, what happened at church last Sunday. She'll go on and on about these things for as long as you'll stand there, barely giving you a chance to excuse yourself and end the conversation politely. The best way we found at work to get away is to signal someone over and turn her attention to the new victim. The funny thing is that nobody, not even I, ever seems to catch on. We'll happily trot over, curious about the conversation, and immediately get caught in the death chatter. However, if she ever starts talking about the news, run for your sanity. I don't know what channel she watches, but every day she seems to find a new story about someone, somewhere, hurting an infant. And it's never just a passing mention. She dwells on it, rambling for as long as half an hour if you let her. I'm starting to think she has a bit of a fixation. Story 10. Everybody has met her. That loud, anxious person with a cracking voice, probably from living in a constant state of self-inflicted crisis. She says more inappropriate things than appropriate ones, and her personal life always seems to spill into her professional world. The kind of person who would leave a client meeting halfway through to grab Starbucks. Her. Anyway, about 2 months after we hired her, she told us she needed to see someone in Miami, we're in Los Angeles, for some vague arm pain. She didn't give us a timeline for her return, just said it might take months to recover. During that conversation, we found out this someone wasn't a doctor, or at least not a licensed medical professional, but a person a friend had recommended. In Miami, for months. She also threatened to sue our insurance company because it didn't cover whatever she was doing, and she had just assumed it would. We never saw her again. But judging by LinkedIn, she keeps landing on her feet, in some surprisingly solid positions. Story 11. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, and my first night was at the check-in desk for clients. I struck up a conversation with a very well put-together woman who had traveled all over the world. We talked about specific places we'd both visited in Egypt. She was clearly educated and articulate, dressed in fine clothes. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked how she'd come to be at the shelter. She said, "I left my CFO position at a huge company in Seattle to take care of my dad who had Alzheimer's. His care cost a lot, and after he passed away, I got depressed, and here I am. But don't worry, I have a daycare up the hill with 25 children who watch TV all day in a storage shed. All I have to do is feed them one meal and one snack." My jaw hit the floor. Turns out she had paranoid schizophrenia and was delusional. The other volunteers were trying not to laugh at my reaction. Talk about a 180. Story 12. Not crazy in the raving lunatic sense, but more in the total bish sense. And this just happened today, so I kind of need to vent. I run a business teaching creative writing classes for kids. I just made a huge move to grow my business. I got a new, much bigger classroom in a great location. I'm thrilled, but it was a ton of work. To celebrate, I decided to throw a reception for my students. I made sure every child had a piece displayed on the gallery wall and invited all the kids and their families. The reception was yesterday, the turnout was great, and I felt amazing. It was a total success. Then last night, I got an email from the mother of 2 sisters in my classes. She said she was sorry to have missed the reception and was disappointed because she hadn't realized it was scheduled. She added that her girls were excited about signing up again next year. I replied that I was sorry she'd missed the emails and paper invitations I'd sent home, but that we'd missed the girls at the party and everyone loved their work on display. That's where it devolved. She started sending long, ranting emails accusing me of violating her children by showing their work to strangers and insisting I had personally excluded them. Legal threats followed. I stayed calm and replied each time with an apology and an acknowledgement that I could have communicated better. But she kept writing, each message longer, weirder, and more accusatory than the last. I felt like I was trapped in the twilight zone. Finally, I answered the craziest email by inviting the girls to a mini reception, just me and them, and I ended with, "It'll be fun. I have cookies." She replied, "Great. What day and time?" So weird. Now I have to hang out with the kids on Thursday and feed them cookies because their mom is unhinged and apparently can't read multiple invitations. I'm honestly wondering if she's going to chop my head off when they show up. In my 18 years of teaching, dealing with difficult parents has consistently been the worst part of the job. Story 13. I had to go into work on my day off to terminate someone. I've fired people before, no big deal. Like all the others, this person had gotten themselves fired, and I'd never really had any crazy issues with them before. I came in about an hour before our location opened. The plan was simple. Handle the termination quickly, then work their scheduled shift. In hindsight, I shouldn't have been alone with them. I explained why they were being terminated. They signed the necessary paperwork and headed for the door. Then the crazy started. First came the fits of maniacal laughter, broken up by sudden shouts of rage. They paced back and forth, occasionally grabbing objects I worried might be thrown. Outwardly, I kept my calm, managerial composure. I repeated, calmly, firmly, that they needed to leave the premises before I called the authorities. They cycled through emotions, begging for their job, laughing about how stupid they'd been, raging about the supposed lies told about them. The cameras proved otherwise, then giggling, sadly. I reiterated that they needed to leave. After about half an hour of coaxing, and with my phone in hand, ready to dial 911, they finally walked out. I immediately called my supervisor to report what had happened. I spent the rest of the day uneasy, half expecting them to come back and do something. Story 14. I met my friend's very Christian girlfriend for the first time, and right away, things got weird. Out of nowhere, she started asking me personal questions. If I was a virgin, who I dated before my current partner, why I never had a crush on her boyfriend, he'd liked me in high school, and who he'd liked back then. She even asked who he'd liked in middle school. It only got stranger after that. My friend and I used to game together all the time, but once she came into the picture, she told me we couldn't game together anymore. We couldn't Skype, talk on the phone, text, or be alone together. Nothing. She said he was a good Christian man and needed only good Christian guy friends. Since I'm a woman, she insisted it was inappropriate for us to be friends at all. Unfortunately, my friend went along with it. He chose her over all of his female friends. We don't talk anymore. Story 15. I once had a next-door neighbor who seemed a bit odd but friendly enough. So cool. One night, I was coming home from work and found her standing outside the apartment building, smoking a cigarette and looking expectant. I said hi. She said hi back, and then launched into this wild story about how Jack Black was her soulmate and how a red four-door car was about to pull up any minute to take her on a road trip. She didn't have a single bag with her. It was obviously ridiculous, but she didn't seem dangerous, and honestly, I wanted to see what happened when the car never showed. So I bummed a smoke and hung out with her while she went on, talking about how some actress had stolen her soul and other bizarre things like that. I wasn't creeped out so much as genuinely entertained by her storytelling. So I stand out there with her for about 15 minutes, getting a little bored, and finally try to say goodbye. But she insists, no, they'll be here any second. Not 5 seconds later, a red four-door car actually pulls up and parks less than a car length away from where we're standing. For one insane moment, I think maybe she's been telling the truth this whole time. Looking relieved, she immediately opens the back door, climbs in, and shuts it behind her. The car starts. I'm standing there in absolute shock. Then, just as suddenly, they kick her out and take off, and I do the same, heading inside while she chases the car down the street and disappears into the night. I'll never forget how stunned I was that the car actually showed up. Story 16. I've got a good one for this. A few years back, I was taking classes at a local community college. I had an 8 a.m. class and was waiting outside the classroom with a few other students for the professor to come unlock the door. I started chatting with a guy I'd spoken to a few times before, though I didn't know him well. He was sketching some kind of futuristic car-motorcycle hybrid in his notebook, so I asked him about it, just making friendly conversation. Everything was totally normal until he suddenly dropped this bombshell. By the way, did you know I'm the reincarnation of the Archangel Michael? I just stared at him and said, what? He proceeds to explain how he and 6 other archangels will lead the purification of the world on December 24th, 2014. He tells me that in order to survive, I'll need to paint a specific symbol on my front door. Then he lifts his shirt and shows me an elaborate tattoo on his chest, 3 colored circles intertwined, and says I'll need to have the same symbol, but with the colors reversed, or everyone in my house will be purged. Then he adds, I know you're cool, but I'll be purging Asia. The guy in charge of North America won't know you, and I won't be able to vouch for you, so you really need to have that symbol on your door. I just nodded politely until the professor finally showed up. Then I went inside and never spoke to him again. Story 17. A few years back, I worked the night shift at an adult store. We were the only 24-hour place around for most of my time there, so I got used to helping people who were stranded or in distress. Like most adult stores, we were right off a busy highway. One night, a guy came stumbling in, drenched in sweat. In January. In Wisconsin. Not a common sight. I greeted him, and he said hello before setting his bag behind the counter, without me even asking, which meant he'd clearly been in before. We didn't allow large purses or backpacks on the sales floor. He stood there on his side of the counter, breathing heavily for a moment. Finally, I asked how he was doing. He said he'd been running. Okay. Anything I could do for him? He nodded and said, yeah, you can call the police. I've been chased by guys in a van. I kicked straight into rescue mode. I handed him the phone and ran to grab a cup of water to help him calm down. When I came back, he was shaking so badly he couldn't dial, so he passed the phone back to me. It was slick with sweat. I called 911 and relayed what he'd told me, but while I was on the phone with dispatch, his story kept growing. Suddenly, there were multiple guys with hammers trying to break into the store. I had camera feeds for the whole building. There was no one outside, no one trying to get in, no one but me and this guy. That's when it hit me. I was alone in the middle of the night, locked in with someone who was clearly having an episode. Dispatch asked if I could see the men he was describing. I said I couldn't. He didn't like that. His voice got sharp. Great. Alone in a store in the middle of the night with a crazy person, and now he's mad at me. I managed to calm him down, explaining that I was just answering the dispatcher's questions. That seemed to satisfy him. I kept things light, stayed on his good side, and waited until the police finally showed up. They took him away. I don't know where. And I never heard anything more about it. He came back a while later to shop, and he seemed fine. Story 18. My partner and I went to a head shop to buy a new piece. The guy working there was probably in his mid-60s with long, flowing white hair and a beard, a total stereotype of the old-school hippie head shop clerk. He was super friendly and helpful, walking us through everything, but then he started going off on this tangent about how he used to follow a band he liked around because he really dug their music and the vibe. Pretty normal stuff, until he got oddly insistent that it was not a gay thing. We assured him we understood. Multiple times. Then the conversation took a hard left turn. He started explaining how he doesn't pay taxes, not on the shop, not on his home, because he'd fought the man in court and proved he had the right not to. According to him, there's copious evidence that taxes are really just royalties to the crown and that nobody owns him. He even handed us a few printed articles and cited some obscure constitutional clause that supposedly proved we're still paying taxes to England. By this point, we'd been in the store for over an hour, long after we'd picked out what we came for, because we panicked and just kept nodding along to be polite. At one point, my boyfriend and I exchanged a single look and both instantly knew we were in the presence of a madman. Story 19. When I was 18, I woke up one morning and went about my usual routine, breakfast in the living room, when a guy I'd never met came up and started talking to me. My parents had a lot of friends, so I didn't think much of it at first. I just tried to carry on a polite conversation. It wasn't easy, though. He talked fast, jumping from topic to topic, and the longer he went on, the stranger it got. He started talking about how wonderful nature was, and how his wife had him walking outside all the time. Then he asked if I believed in God. And before I could answer, he asked me to pray with him. In the middle of the prayer, which I was only half participating in, he suddenly announced that he was God, and started asking if I believed in him. There's no good way to describe talking to someone who genuinely believes they're the creator of the universe. I quietly excused myself to figure out who this man even was, and to find someone else to help. Turns out, he was my stepmother's sister's husband. He'd recently been in a bad car accident while serving overseas, and was staying with us for a few days because his wife, now his caregiver, was struggling to cope. I'll never forget how normal he'd seemed at first. Story 20. When I was in college, I had a much older single neighbor named Mikey who wasn't exactly all there. The neighborhood was made up of single-family homes that had been converted into condos or townhomes, each with its own entrance but shared walls. Mikey lived in the unit directly below mine, and his front door was right beneath my bedroom window. On my first night there, while I was unpacking, I heard these loud, concussive slams in rapid succession, mixed with bursts of manic babbling that faded in and out with each thud. I followed the sound to the window and looked down. Below, I could see the shadow of a short, squat man, his silhouette, flickering in and out of view as the front door below me opened and slammed shut again and again. Every time the door opened, his voice spilled out into the night, a string of jumbled words, laughter, and muttering, before another thunderous slam cut it off. It went on like that for 2 hours, without pause. I never saw Mikey himself that night, only his shadow. About a week later, I was walking home from campus while on the phone when I saw this Danny DeVito-shaped man waddling down the sidewalk, having what looked like a very animated argument with the air. He was gesturing wildly, throwing his hands up, making emphatic points to nobody. He'd do the what the heck hands at a neighbor's yard, the this crap right here, at parked cars, and an up yours to every barking dog he passed. And then he saw me. Once I was in front of him, his entire chaotic energy locked onto me. I didn't know it at the time, but this was my downstairs neighbor, the same guy whose shadow I'd seen slamming his door over and over that first night. He started following me, ranting and raving in pure nonsense, his volume rising with every step. I was trying to stay calm, running through my options: cross the street, duck into a store, keep walking. But before I could decide, I was already home. I hurried upstairs, heart pounding, while he kept pacing and yelling below. I was relieved when it finally went quiet, but only for a second. Then the slamming started again. I looked out the window and saw that same DeVito-shaped silhouette appear, disappear, slam, open, over and over, just like before. Turns out Mikey was fairly harmless. He didn't drive or bike, but his family checked on him regularly. We eventually became friends, in a way. His life was shaped by mental health struggles, but he had the sweetness and unpredictability of a child. Mikey passed away a few years later. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the walls just right, you can still hear that door. Slam, open, slam, over and over again. Story 21. I happened to run into an acquaintance at a coffee shop while I was studying. He asked if he could sit with me since there were no other free tables, so I took a break and chatted with him for a bit. Typical socially awkward nerd. Nothing out of the ordinary for my circle. About half an hour in, I start to notice a smell. The kind of smell that smells smelly. A crappy smell. We weren't anywhere near the restroom, so I asked if he smelled it too. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Yeah, I had to take a dump, so I just went in my pants." For a second, I was more concerned than disgusted. I asked if he needed help. Maybe I could find him some clean clothes or something. He just shrugged and said, "Oh, no, it's fine. I do this all the time." That's when every warning bell in my brain went off at once. I tried to extract myself as politely as possible, but he kept talking. First about comic books, then, completely out of nowhere, about how drinking your own piss is really healthy in a lot of ways. At that point, I started sending SOS messages to every friend I had in the area. Thankfully, one came through and showed up pretending we had a group project meeting. I grabbed my stuff and bolted. By the time I got home, I just wanted to cry in the shower and erase the whole experience from my brain. Story 22. When I was 18, I was supposed to meet some friends in a crowded part of town I didn't know very well. While I was trying to find my way, a man, maybe in his 40s, stopped me to ask something innocuous, like the time. Where I live, that kind of thing can be a setup, a distraction, while someone else grabs your purse. So, my guard was already up. I answered him politely and kept walking, but he started walking with me. At first, the conversation was harmless enough. Books, sports, small talk, but I stayed on edge. I dodged every question that could give away personal information, never said what school I went to, just kept things surface level. But he didn't go away, and I still didn't know exactly where I was. Thankfully, I spotted one of the friends I was supposed to meet and used the chance to say goodbye. He asked for my number and if we could hang out sometime. My friend's eyes went wide, instantly realizing what she'd just walked into. I told him I was leaving for an out-of-state school soon, so no, we couldn't hang out. He finally backed off and my friend and I walked away. She just looked at me and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that just happened." Yeah, me too. Story 23. My coworker is one of those people who's a straight-up blowhard, never listens, constantly interrupts, always has to do everything her way. If something goes wrong, it's automatically your fault, never hers. She's not a manager, but acts like she's in charge of everyone. Absolutely insufferable. The other day, she started in on me about some tiny discrepancy in the system. Something from months ago, before I was even handling that task. She treated it like World War III. I calmly explained that it was an old anomaly and that I'd been entering everything correctly ever since. I had to repeat that 5 times before she suddenly snapped, "Well, I'm not going to do the extra work because you don't want to do your job." Another time, I made a totally harmless comment while refiling a stack of documents. Something like, "Hey, this isn't too bad as long as all the files are in here correctly, right?" She exploded. "Well, first off, I've been filing for 25 years, so I'm not going to let someone tell me I don't know." And on and on. I was dumbfounded. I've learned that people who think every neutral statement is a personal attack are, without exception, absolutely unhinged. Story 24. I worked at this place that was, for lack of a better term, temporary housing. Because we were listed on Hotels.com, Expedia, and sites like that, a lot of people treated us like a hotel, even though guests could stay long term. I was still pretty new to the job and hadn't gotten to know the regulars yet, though it didn't take long to learn that most of them were, frankly, completely unhinged. One day, we started getting phone calls from someone my coworkers referred to as N2Y4. Apparently, whenever she called, whoever picked up would end up stuck on the phone for half an hour to an hour, which wrecked our front desk workflow. That kind of thing wasn't unusual, but my coworkers warned me. This one was different. No, they said. This woman speaks gibberish, and we're all pretty sure she's on meth. All right then, noted. Weeks went by, and I still hadn't spoken to or seen N204, until one fateful Friday. A gaunt woman appeared at the front desk. Her arms and body were covered in pockmarks, and her lips looked burned. "Excuse me, sir," she says, voice shaking. "A lady just stole $1,500 from me, and I don't know what to do." Can you believe that? A woman just came out of nowhere and stole my purse. This is the third time this has happened to me on your property. Before I can respond, another woman walks up behind her, holding a blue purse. "I think you dropped this outside the office," she says. N204 turns, her face lighting up. "Oh, thank you, darling." She takes the purse, opens it, and pulls out a wad of cash. Then she counts it, once, twice, and looks back at me with wide eyes. There's twice as much now. 3,000 smackaroos. We lock eyes. Crap. Then she launches straight into a new monologue, words tumbling over each other like a landslide. "So anyways, I've been trying to get out of Dodge for like 3 weeks, but my mom abandoned me with nowhere to go. Can you believe that? It's all because Charlie Sheen used to come to the property with my sister, and we'd party with some of your security guys here, and this kind of thing happens all the time. My dad used to tour with Bruce Springsteen, and he'd have their Asian groupies. Well, you can imagine. And that's how he got all his blow. Not that I'd do blow. I'd never do blow. But Christ, man. You guys need to work on the parking situation around here. I've had so many purses stolen on this property." So anyway, back to my mom abandoning me. She locked eyes with me and never blinked the entire time she talked. Just stood there, rattling off these fragmented stories that barely connected to each other. I couldn't interrupt, couldn't step away. She just kept going, her words spilling out in one endless stream. How was I going to get out of this? Please, for the love of God, let someone come up with a customer service emergency. I opened our work's instant messaging app and sent my coworker one word: help. A minute later, she appeared at the front desk and said she needed me for something. Bless her. I escaped. Weeks later, we had to kick N204 off the property for reasons that surprised absolutely no one. She terrified me. Story 25. I was out one night talking to a friend of a friend. An older woman, a mom of 3 grown kids. She was one of those people trying a little too hard to relive her youth, the kind who goes out drinking with her kids. I'd just met her that night, and she was laughing hysterically as she told me about this guy she'd been talking to online. He worked FIFO in another state, and they'd planned to meet while he was home for a few days, but he canceled, saying he wanted to spend time with his kids instead. So, using a screenshot he'd once sent her of his flight booking, she called the airline and canceled his return flight. He didn't find out until he got to the airport. To be clear, she had never met this man, and she thought sabotaging his travel and potentially his job was a totally appropriate and funny form of revenge. I just said, wow, downed my drink in one go, and told her I was going to grab another. Then I found my friend and told her, never leave me alone with that crazy woman again. Story 26. I started dating a guy I met online. We hung out pretty often and everything seemed great at first. But after a few weeks, I started to notice strange inconsistencies in his behavior. Sometimes he'd overreact to my jokes, laughing way too hard. Other times, he wouldn't even crack a smile during a comedy. He'd go from talking loudly and animatedly to complete silence without warning. Once, he suddenly screamed and ran out of the room after staring at an empty spot on the floor. I knew something was off, but we hadn't been together long enough for me to ask. Then one day, we were supposed to meet, but he never showed up. I went to his apartment. No answer. First, I was angry, then worried. Eventually, I went home, not sure what else to do. The next day, his friend texted me. He told me that my boyfriend had been admitted to a mental institution after hurting himself. He'd been hearing voices telling him to do it. It was his first bipolar diagnosis. I visited him every day until he was discharged 3 weeks later. His friend even gave me books about how to support a partner living with bipolar disorder. At that point in our relationship, things were more or less back to how they'd been before the incident. We went on a few more dates and talked openly about what had happened, and he shared more about his experiences, things he hadn't felt comfortable telling me earlier. But he was an exchange student, and we both knew it couldn't last. I returned the books to his friend, and about a month later he left. We stayed in touch for a while. I helped him through a few of his breakdowns, and later, when I started having my own, he helped me through mine. Story 27. At the end of a 2-year relationship, during our last weekend together just before I finally broke up with her, everything came into focus. She'd been slowly unraveling for about a year. The gaslighting, the cheating, the endless blame. Everything somehow became my fault. I'd been holding on, trying to help her, trying to believe there was something left to save. That weekend, I went in with almost no hope, but I needed closure. I asked questions. Not to fight, just to understand. I wanted to hear her side, to see if there was any truth beneath all the chaos. But the longer we talked, the more the layers of manipulation and self-delusion started to peel away. She couldn't even keep track of her own lies anymore. She'd contradict herself, accuse me of things she'd done, twist every word until I was the villain again. Somewhere in the middle of all that, it just clicked. Oh, I thought, I've been wasting my time, haven't I? This wasn't someone who needed love and understanding. This was someone who thrived on confusion and control. So I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving all of it behind. Story 28. In 2002, I spent a month taking Greyhound buses all around the U.S., met some absolute gems and some absolute weirdos. One leg of the trip was a direct ride from Chicago to New York City, which took the better part of 2 days. I ended up next to a scraggly guy missing his 2 front teeth. He told me he was the lead singer of a metal band called Halloween, who, according to him, had been pretty big back in the day. Sure, I thought. I've never heard of them, but I guess someone had to be. He launched into story after story about his glory days, touring the world, hanging out with Ozzy Osbourne, being friends with Randy Rhoads, and playing in a band with his brother. I'm not much of a metalhead, but I've always been a big music fan. I knew how easy it was to fall out of the industry, so I just shrugged and took his stories at face value. He told me all about how things had gone downhill. The addiction, the bad choices, the string of hard luck that left him broke and alone. He said he'd spent weeks trying to reach one of his old showbiz friends and that, finally, Ozzy himself had wired him enough money for a Greyhound ticket to New York. There, he said, he was going to get help, get clean, and maybe even get some of the band back together. He was a bit of an odd one. Sleeping on a bus is never easy. People contort themselves in all sorts of ways trying to find comfort. But kneeling on the floor with your head resting on the seat? That was a first for me. Nevertheless, I was really rooting for the guy. 2 days sitting next to someone creates a strange kind of camaraderie, and by the time we got to New York, I genuinely wished him well. I even promised I'd check out their shows if they ever toured the UK. The next day, while wandering around the city, I stopped in a music shop and looked up Halloween. And yeah, that wasn't him. Not even close. Bus Dude was American and rail thin. Halloween were German, still together, still touring. And their lead singer looked nothing like the man I'd spent 2 days talking to. Someone having a vivid imagination isn't unusual, but the consistency of his story floored me. Every detail, every name, every memory came out like gospel truth. He didn't sound like he was lying. He sounded like he believed it. I don't know what needs to be going on in your head to live inside a story like that. And I hope I never find out. Story 29. I work at a body shop. I just answer phones, mostly. This guy's car had been finished for 8 months, but he'd cashed the insurance check and couldn't afford to pick it up. Sadly, that kind of thing happens a lot. So once a car's done, we just leave it until the customer can pay. Anyway, he finally came in to get his baby back, but when we tried to start it, nothing. Dead battery. I'm a girl in my early 20s who knows next to nothing about cars, but I decided to help. I hooked up the charger, got it started, and told him there was no guarantee it would make it home. It was an old car, and that battery was toast. I offered to have our shuttle take him home and said I could leave his car on the charger overnight. He declined and waited on the phone for 10 minutes, then tried to drive away, but the car stopped right in front. It didn't even make it out of the driveway. A few coworkers tried charging it again for a little longer, but by then it was well past closing since he had arrived so late. They all have kids, so we told him it would be best to leave the car with us to charge. It was all we could do since he needs a new battery. Corrosion can't be fixed. Even I know that. He said he was willing to risk it and left. The next morning, we received a call from presumably his wife saying we sent him away without helping. She said the car didn't make it home, they had to tow it, and now we're expected to pay for the tow, pay to bring it back, and pay for a new battery. It's a 2010 car, and this happened in 2018. The car had been sitting for 8 months while he spent the insurance money and tried to get the funds back together. I did everything in my power to help him. We never obtained the title when he abandoned it, and we didn't charge him the daily storage fee of $25 a day for 8 months because he said he was sick. I told him that since he still owned the car, and considering the thousands of dollars I saved him, he could probably afford to buy another $100 battery. Every time you really try to help someone, they end up taking advantage. Story 30. I was on a church trip with a charity that offered missions training for college-age students preparing to become full-time missionaries. So there were quite a few religious fanatics there. I met this girl who seemed a little odd but harmless at first. Then she told me she wrote letters to God, and that the next day, he would write her back. Later, she started talking about a vision she said she had of me. Without warning, she hugged me tightly and began screaming a prayer in my ear for about 5 minutes. I broke down crying because I was exhausted, in pain from an injury to my spine the day before, and terrified. She was shouting almost in tongues, and I couldn't move or get away. Until the trip ended, I did my best to avoid her. Apparently, she had healed a few other students on the trip from depression and convinced them to stop taking their antidepressants cold turkey. One of my friends, who had been on a high dosage, started showing severe withdrawal symptoms by the end of the week. I was terrified he might have a seizure. She told him that God would protect him, and he believed her. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to fully distance myself and ended up on the receiving end of her screaming prayers 2 more times that week. Story 31. Years ago, I was working at a retail pharmacy when one night turned into pure chaos. I was standing near the front when a woman walked in quickly, holding what I first thought was a walking stick. I greeted her, and she paused to look at me. That's when I realized it wasn't a walking stick, but a long metal pipe. Her expression changed to anger, and before I could react, she started swinging the pipe, smashing everything on the first few end caps. Bottles of body wash went flying, body sprays burst open, and caps scattered everywhere. As she destroyed the shelves, she yelled things like, "I told you not to bother my daughter, and you're watching us with your satellites." It was clear she believed someone was after her. We called the police, who met her outside. She resisted and fought them before they finally managed to subdue her. I felt awful about having her arrested. It was obvious she was in the middle of a schizophrenic episode and truly thought she was protecting her daughter. Cleaning up afterward took hours. It was one of the hardest, saddest nights I ever had on the job. Story 32. When I first moved out of home with my girlfriend at 18, we could only afford a 1-bedroom flat in a rundown apartment complex behind a car wash on a busy highway. The building had 4 stories of these grimy units, mostly rented by international students, though there were definitely some strange characters living there too. We'd been there for a few months and had never met the guy who lived across the hall. One day, we came home to find someone installing a security screen over his front door. A few weeks later, we returned again and noticed a security camera mounted above his door. Not a small, discreet dome type, but a full-sized white body camera with a lens jutting out. It was aimed straight down the hallway, practically pointing right at our front door. I was home alone one day when my neighbor knocked on my door. He was a disheveled man in his 50s, bigger than me, but not immediately threatening. Still, something about him felt off. He awkwardly introduced himself and started asking a bunch of personal questions about my job, my family, my life. I was 18, a bit of a stoner, and the whole thing made me uncomfortable, so I told him I had something to do and ended the conversation as politely as I could. About 5 minutes later, there was another knock. This time, he had his arm in a sling and was holding a tin of beans and a manual can opener. The old kind you have to crank. He said he'd hurt his arm and asked if I could help him open the can. I only had the door open a crack, but I took the tin from him and started trying to open it, all while feeling more uneasy by the second. The guy, suddenly changed. His whole demeanor switched in an instant. He started shoving against the door, trying to force his way inside, yelling things like, "I know what you're up to. I've seen you." I pushed back with everything I had and managed to slam the door shut. I can't even remember if I threw the can of beans at him or still had it in my hand. I just stood there, heart pounding, in complete shock, thinking, what the hell was that? About 30 seconds later, there was another knock. My adrenaline was still spiking. I grabbed a large kitchen knife from the counter. Not to threaten him, just to feel like I had something to protect myself with. The kitchen was right next to the entryway in that tiny apartment, so it was within reach. I opened the door, knife at my side, trying to look calm but ready for whatever was coming next. When I opened the door again, the neighbor was standing there just as before, arm still in the sling, but now smiling like nothing had happened. He politely offered me a cigarette, completely calm and friendly, as if he hadn't just tried to break into my apartment moments earlier. I just said, "I don't want your frigging cigarette," and shut the door again. A little later, I went to talk to the apartment superintendent and told him what had happened. He started laughing and explained that the guy was paranoid and believed I'd been sent by the government to spy on him. Apparently that's why he'd been putting up the security screen and camera. The poor guy must have been off his meds. I have no idea what he thought he'd find in my tiny flat. Maybe reel-to-reel tapes and secret agents hiding behind the couch. He never came back after that. His apartment stayed quiet, and eventually, someone else moved in across from us. Story 33. I was studying for finals with a friend at my university. We went to one of the common student hubs on campus and sat at a row of small tables. Two very old men, and I mean really old, came downstairs from an event where people could meet and talk with the university president. They stood out immediately since you almost never see anyone that age around campus, and they sat at the table right next to us. At first, they seemed hilarious. They were teasing each other constantly, the same way my friends and I do, and we thought they were just a couple of funny old guys. Then, the younger one of the two went to the bathroom, leaving the other, let's call him Z, sitting near us. Z asked what we were working on, so we told him we were studying for finals, and a friendly conversation started. For a while, he seemed genuinely kind and interested, until, completely out of nowhere, he started insisting that the moon landing was fake. Okay, weird turn. Not crazy, but okay. He keeps going on about this and tells us to take our classes down to the science building or NASA, we are nowhere near NASA, and look at the official image of Pluto, because Mickey Mouse's dog Pluto was hidden in it. Then he sings us a jingle about how NASA hates the people it deceives, but loves doing it anyway, after telling us he used to be a music producer in Hollywood back in the day. Then he starts going on about being a flat earther. I still don't know how we got there. Finally, Z's friend gets back, and he seems a bit more grounded. Great, because my friend and I had been trying to find a way out of this conversation for a while. His buddy tells Z to tell us where he was a few weeks earlier. Z says he was in Washington County and came across some white supremacists. Weird, but not a red flag, though by that point we were sure it was coming. As this man talks about his experience, we can't tell if he's against the white supremacists or not. Then, after a while, he says he talked to their leader, and that the man actually made some good points. And that's when we knew. Finally, my friend lies and says she's going to be late for her doctor's appointment, and I jump at the chance to say I'll make sure she gets back to her car. Just before we go, the man gives us his business card. He really was a music producer or something, and he has the strangest name I've ever seen. He also runs a crop circle talk show or something, which I actually thought sounded pretty normal at first until I remembered he's a flat earther. We got out of there fast, and it still ranks at the very top of the weirdest conversations I've ever had. We're still careful walking outside our library, since he sometimes shows up to protest. Story 34. I worked as a taxi dispatcher from my house for about a year. It was a small company, and I had maybe 5 regular daytime drivers. One of them, Greg, was always very nice to me, though he could get emotional at times. Driving a cab isn't easy. You deal with your share of drunks and jerks. But Greg and I always got along pretty well. I never really had any complaints about him. I'd met him plenty of times too. The drivers would sometimes drop off their rent money, what they paid the owner to use the car for the day. Or, since I lived right in the center of town, they'd stop by to chat when things were slow. So I stopped dispatching. And about a month later, there's a knock at my door. It's Greg, and he's in tears. I thought maybe one of his bunnies had died. He was very attached to them, but he asks if he can sit down, says it's really serious. Then he starts telling me this story about how the government is marking people for concentration camps by putting red, yellow, or green flags in their yards. According to him, they were turning Walmarts into the camps because they already had bathrooms, pharmacies, food, and plenty of space, and they were closing them under the excuse of plumbing problems. He said the Obama administration was taking people's guns, and now his daughter in Tallahassee had just called to say her Walmart was closed due to plumbing issues. They're getting closer, he says, crying real tears. Then he tells me he has property in the mountains, and if they get to our town, my family and I are welcome to come. He says he likes me and doesn't want to see me put in a camp. It was surreal. I never would have expected this kind of nonsense from him. Later, I found out it was all some sort of Alex Jones conspiracy garbage. I agreed with him, told him yes, if they came to our town, he should call me, mostly because I was home alone, a little freaked out, and just wanted him to leave. About a week later, our Walmart actually closed for a day because they found a mobile meth lab in the parking lot. I called the new dispatcher to see if Greg was freaking out, and she said he'd given his notice, said he was moving to the mountains, even though the Walmart was back open the very next day. Now he comes into my new job all the time, so I guess he never actually left for the mountains. I completely ignore him every time I see him. Edit. I guess this is what happens when you drive around all day listening to Fox News Style Talk Radio. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.